Today's reading is from Isaiah, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2, they covered their faces, and with 2, they covered their feet, and with 2, they flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, "Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me."
"Woe is me," said the ancient prophet. "I am lost. For I am one of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips." Did we not all cry out, "Woe"? Or maybe something a little more visceral when we saw what we saw? We saw Alton Sterling shot. We saw Philando Castile shot. Did we not cry out woe, or maybe something more visceral, when we learned that the officers in Dallas, Texas, Lorne Ahern, Michael Kroll, Michael Smith, Brent Thompson, and Patrick Zimmerman were shot to death while doing their duty? Isaiah cries, "Woe." He cries woe because in his lifetime, the king Uzziah died. He probably died in battle, as the northern kingdom, sometimes referred to as Ephraim in Holy Scripture, was at war with the Assyrians. He cries woe because when a king dies in the ancient world, it's often the beginning of great political and social upheaval, as the lines of succession were seldom clear enough to prevent rival contenders to the throne to seek its power. He cries woe because it was a day of great uncertainty. Isaiah cried woe because he beheld the very glory of God, even in the midst of that chaos and confusion. The vision that's described in the 6th chapter of Isaiah fits very nicely with what we know or think we know of the worship in the ancient temple. The perspective seems to be that Isaiah has come through the main entrance to the temple, looking up to the Holy of Holies, where the table would be upon which sat the Ark of the Covenant, believed to be the throne of God. And the glory of God fills the temple. Actually, it's just the hem of the divine robe that fills the temple, because God is so much bigger than the temple. And the seraphs, they're angelic beings who would serve as the attendants in the divine court, are there with 6 wings. With 2 they cover their faces because one does not look upon the holiness of God. And with 2 they cover their feet, probably a euphemism for something else, that one would cover so as to come into the divine presence with full reverence. And with 2 they fly to attend to the divine. The shaking of the temple is a sign that the world is in transition as the holiness has come. And the singing back and forth of the seraphs or the angels would mimic the singing back and forth of the people in the temple as they worshiped God, singing antiphonally, a call, a repeat, or a response. Isaiah cried, "Woe," because deep in his bones, he knows that he cannot measure up to the fullness and the holiness of the God whom he envisions. Well, this morning I planned on preaching the second sermon in a series, the basic beliefs of the Christian faith and what it means to be human. And I think the importance of what I was planning to do it, and I'm still going to, but I think the importance of that teaching has increased for us because we have cried woe this week from all that we have seen. So what does the Bible tell us about being human? How have the doctrines of the church shaped our understanding of being human? And if we reflect on those theologically and weave them into our life, can we find comfort? And can we find challenge as we look for a better day? So I'll start with the Bible. You know, it's almost a silly question to ask, what does the Bible say? It's a silly question because the Bible really isn't one book written at one moment in time by one author with a single teaching. The Bible itself is a collection of many books composed by multiple authors, perhaps over a 700-year period. And even as those authors in that window of 700 years would write, they would reach much further back into ancient texts that they had, texts that we no longer have today. Some parts of the Bible come to us from Israel's glory days, when they are a free and independent nation living in Judea, and they govern themselves. And other parts of the Bible come to us in the miserable days, when they live as captives of one of the many empires that would rise and fall in the ancient Near East. So the Bible is not one document coming from one time and one place. It's also difficult to find in the Bible simple explanations of ideas. The Bible does not contain those concrete teachings that we can look to and read. It is instead a collection of stories that we seek to interpret, poems that we try to figure out, laws that we try to discern their meaning and their intent. But they give us hints. Adam and Eve are the first people in the creation story, created in the image and in the likeness of God. We're also told of noble leaders who govern Israel with integrity and with faithfulness, who are faithful in the work that they do. But there is an overarching, consistent theme of the grand narrative that begins in Genesis and runs all the way through to the end of the book of Revelation, that human beings are created in the image of God, that we are capable of great love and glorious creativity. We are capable of bold acts of living justly. And yet, there is a consistent weaving of a story of a flaw, of something being not quite right. Adam and Eve eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And of all the voices they can listen to in the glorious garden, they choose to listen to the serpent. Not a good choice. And they do what God said they ought not to do. Consequently, a glorious image is marred. The kings of Israel are great and they do good things, except when they're not and they don't. Ahab marries Jezebel, and Jezebel brings to the Hebrew court a very different notion of what it means to be king. So when Ahab wants a certain piece of land, Jezebel gets it for him. And were it not for the death of Naboth, becomes the means by which he loses his property. And Ahab stops being a Hebrew king and becomes a king like the kings that have conquered them before. David is the greatest of Israel's kings. He founds the city of Jerusalem. It becomes the center. He brings peace to the homeland. And yet, even he has this tragic flaw. Adultery and murder mark his early days on the throne, followed by a chaotic family life that erupts in revolt and the death of his son, Absalom. We meet the prophets who are bold to call out the kings for their unfaithful leadership. and often they die for doing so. And we're told of Jesus of Nazareth, who, unlike any other human being, because there is no tragic flaw in that life. He teaches a way of life, and then he lives each day consistent with those teachings. And like the prophets of old, he is rejected and he is killed for what he taught. But God raised him from the dead, that the teachings like Jesus live on in you and in me if we would embrace them and commit ourselves to live by them. Jesus of Nazareth is different. Though he had the power over all things, he would not use that power for his own benefit. He did not use even his power over death to avoid personal suffering. Instead, he died that we might be forgiven. Well, from the few Bible stories I've had an opportunity to retell, and the many others, the church has constructed a basic doctrine about what it means to be human. That all human beings are created by God, and that God made us to be good. That we all carry within us that image of the Creator. The world is never to be divided between good people and bad people. No one race is better than another. And I would be so bold as to say this morning that one religion is not better than another religion. That no matter who we are the wonderful handiwork of a good God. The church's doctrine on being human has also recognized that there is a bit of a flaw in each one of us. Each one is capable of greatness and nobility, and we have no reason not to do the very, very best that we can in each and every opportunity that we have. But at the same time, we all have to recognize that within ourselves lives this imperfection and flaw. We will make mistakes. We will need to be forgiven. And probably the hardest thing of all is to be able to forgive ourselves. And all the people we'll encounter in our lives, they too will make mistakes. God will forgive them. And we all try our best to forgive those. We are a glorious creation, we human beings, capable of greatness, but susceptible to mistakes. Well, since the God-given stories of the Bible tell us these things, and the doctrines of the church help crystallize those teachings, I wonder, can something of this help us make sense out of the horrible things that have made us cry woe this week? Some of us have been reading Jim Wallace's book, America's Original Sin, which is a study of racism throughout American culture. And I'm so glad that we were studying that book, because it's been a great resource for me as I've processed all that I have seen and heard this week. And while not all of us agree equally that the author is convincing at every point in his arguments, it has sparked helpful conversation. And at least I come away from the book fairly convinced that the experience of African Americans in the United States in the year 2016 is quite different than the experience of white people in the United States in the year 2016. That difference shows up in almost every area of life. It shows up in education. It shows up in health care. It shows up in family structures and in the support mechanisms available through our communities. It shows up in our treatment, in both law enforcement and in the courts of our land. So I wonder, if we who are white can somehow find within ourselves the capacity to listen with greater sensitivity to what we're hearing from the African American community as they describe their experiences. Can we understand that even though we're all capable of noble things and we all share a tragic flaw, can we listen intently and not judge what we hear? The other thing that I think we've learned is that the racism in today's culture is very different than what it was a few decades ago. We all remember a few decades ago how overt racism was, how easily we could hear horrible things said. I just remember half the things my father said to me. And we've done well, monitoring ourselves and our own society to step away from those overt forms of racism. But there still now are less overt, but still present racial matters in our country. And they're also a lot more systemic than individual. So it's not so, if we want to try to make sense out of racism, it's really not, we can't blame one person, and we can't say that this one person is responsible for that one act. And maybe the tragic shootings are more a series of many smaller decisions along the way. And might it not be within our power to be understanding for the officers involved? Can we refrain from assuming the worst about the law enforcement officers that were involved? We simply can never know what flashed through their minds. And those moments were horrifying for them as well. Marin Terabasi is a New Hampshire preacher and poet who publishes many thoughts. And she helped me this week. May her words help us this morning. Her poem is entitled Lament for America, and it reads, Lament for America, weeping for Dallas. We light candles, we grieve, and we are afraid. The cross rises in this land when two pieces of sorrow come together. The loss of black lives and the violent reprisal against the innocent. Always the innocent. This time, law enforcement officers. We do not put out our candles. We cannot dry our tears. But we pray that fear does not become anger and hatred, a birthplace for more violence, but our reminder of the resurrection. I'd like to close this sermon by lighting 7 candles here in our chancel. And as we light those candles, I'll read the name of each life that was lost this week. Alton Sterling. Philando Castile. Lauren A. Hearns. Michael Kroll. Michael J. Smith. Brent Thompson. Patrick Zimmerman.
Lift your hands, let I see the pain. Come soak this dry heart with healing rain. Only you, the Son of Man, can take a leper and let him stand. So lift your